Слава Україні! Слава нації! Україна! 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 Героям України тричі! Ворогам України тричі! You know, my friends, I'm happy not only because Gareth came here to speak to us, which I always personally appreciate, because he says very important things here, but also because of the thing that he mentioned. That it's very important to remind to every single person who comes to our rallies and every single person who passes by us, so that they can know what truly created this war. What was the origin of this war? The Shills and the Russophiles will claim that it was the supposed expansion of NATO. It wasn't. Latvia, as we know, is the same distance to Moscow as the closest region of Ukraine. It was never about proximity to Moscow. It was never about proximity of NATO. It was about whether or not the Russians would get away with it. That was the real question at hand, my friends. But what truly created this issue? We have to go all the way back to the election after the Orange Revolution. I was still a child back then. I said I would vote for Yushchenko when people asked me, because I believed in him. The Ukrainian people believed in him back then. And although at first it looked like he lost the election, after they checked the election and proved the voter fraud of Viktor Yanukovych, or Bandukovich, as we like to call him, the bandit, who was twice, not once, but twice, put in jail before he ran for president. When he was caught cheating, he lost the election and Yushchenko became the president of Ukraine. Yushchenko started very well, with very good intentions, very good speeches, very good overall ideas. However, when he was poisoned, he changed his tune quite a lot. He was afraid. His family was threatened. His life was under a perpetual threat by the Russian terrorist regime. Everybody knew this. Everybody knew who killed Valery Gonadze and many other Ukrainians who fought for freedom. Yushchenko was too scared to continue walking the good path when he became a fraud, as he was poisoned and he was very disfigured by that poison. And in the next election, when he ran again, Yanukovych won, supposedly. Because this time, they never checked him for voter fraud. It's funny, isn't it? The individual who was caught doing voter fraud on the first election was not checked for voter fraud on the second one, when he won again. And he did indeed become president of Ukraine. Well, at least, if we suspend our disbelief and truly accept it as a fact that he was elected, which is questionable at best. When Yanukovych became president, the Ukrainian people did not protest at first, because Yanukovych had made promises to the Ukrainian people. He had made the promise of closer relations with the EU, with Europe. He had made the promise to make Ukraine a part of Europe, not just geographically, but culturally, economically, for a better future. And people wanted that. However, after a short while, Yanukovych changed his tune. The money started flowing in his pockets from Moscow. And he decided to instead make Ukraine join an economic alliance with Russia. Obviously, the people were outraged. The people did not like what was going on. They went to Maidan and they protested. Those were peaceful protests. But then, Yanukovych had deployed all kinds of crooks and goons and his private police forces. These police forces started shooting at the Ukrainian protesters, at the peaceful protesters, with rubber bullets first, and then with real ammunition. This is where the term Nebesna Sotnya comes from. The 100 people who died in the Maidan Revolution. Murdered, martyred, by the crooks who were siding with the Russian terrorist regime. But Yanukovych could not stop the tide with grains of sand. The revolution was successful and he fled to Russia, of all places. What a surprise, isn't it? Surprising that he didn't go to Romania or to Moldova or to Poland, but to Russia, of all places. Truly surprising. It's almost as if the Russians had him in their pocket from the very beginning. And for a long time, very funny memes was coming out with Yanukovych saying that he was the legitimate president of Ukraine. The Russians did not like what was happening. They knew that their influence in Ukraine had its days counted. And that is why they acted very quickly and very shamelessly, breaking every agreement they had made with Ukraine and with many other countries about Ukrainian sovereignty, including Budapest Memorandum and the Ukraine-Russia Friendship Treaty. And they sent their troops with no badges to Crimea to occupy the whole peninsula, which, by the way, is considered a war crime. You cannot use your military forces as a country with no badges, no insignia, and expect to get away with it. And the Russians did it multiple times, in fact, not only in Crimea, also in Donbass, where they have brainwashed a lot of the people who lived in those lands. And they have invaded with their own troops and their own crooks to take over the Donbass also. And that was the beginning of this war, all the way back in 2014. When the Russians did not like the will of the Ukrainian people, so they decided to break that will once and for all. They failed. However, they succeeded in one particular regard, which is there was no consequence for their action. And because of that lack of consequences, the Russians have tried exactly the same thing again, but on a larger scale against the whole Ukrainian people. That's a bit rude, my friend. You shouldn't be doing that. I hope your parents teach you better manners next time. He just threw some trash from the bus over there. Very unfortunate behavior, very unfortunate. I hope somebody gets smacked bottom by his mom at home. Anyway, I digress, my friends. Let's continue. The Russian terrorist regime decided to put the same exact antics at play again 2 years ago, when they went for a full invasion of Ukraine. They got crushed at Kyiv, although many military analysts were expecting them to take the city in weeks. They got crushed in Kherson after holding the city for about a year. They got crushed in Kharkiv with a large-scale counteroffensive, a very successful counteroffensive done by the Ukrainians. Now, the war is not progressing much. Occasionally, Ukrainians destroy a ship or an expensive plane of the Russians, but other than that, not much is changing. And that is why we need provisions for Ukraine. We need the Ukrainian people to be able to finally bring justice to the Russian terrorist regime and to finally end this war by stopping Russia. Stop Russia, stop the war! Stop Russia, stop the war!